All right, thank you for having me. My name is Ozan. I'm a research fellow at the Best Center here. So the title of my talk is Religion, Parochialism, and Intuitive Cooperation. And that's also the title of our recent publication, which is joint work with Onurcan Yılmaz, who is my close collaborator, as well as with John Moll, who is an emeritus professor of psychology at Leeds University Business School. So what we do in this project is to basically test two opposing views on religious cooperation. That is to say, cooperation by religious believers. In the current state of the literature, one can discern two approaches to this question: why religious believers tend to be more cooperative, which is for which there is widespread evidence. One view says there is generalized prosociality, that religious believers have more prosocial traits, such as, for example, lower CRT or cognitive reflection. And some evidence suggests that they are equally cooperative towards both atheists as well as their co-religionist believers. Another line of thought or series of evidence shows, on the other hand, parochial prosociality, that belief in moralistic gods sustains large-scale cooperation with other believers through religious networks. And there is, in fact, increasing evidence for widespread anti-atheist bias around the world, including places like the US, and further evidence that this bias may be intuitive or related or associated with spontaneous responses. Another opposing view in the literature, which we also test in this project, is about the cognitive basis of cooperation. Here, the two views that we juxtapose is, on the one hand, the social heuristics hypothesis, which suggests that humans are intuitively cooperative because cooperation tends to be self-beneficial, so people, as they interact with others through these contexts of cooperation, internalize the cooperation strategy as an intuitive heuristic reaction. But the accumulating evidence for the social heuristics hypothesis has been mixed, and replications have been difficult to come by. In contrast to this, we have the self-control hypothesis, which is that humans are in fact quite the opposite, that they are in fact intuitively selfish because of a visceral self-protective reaction, and that instead it is reflection or deliberation that should increase cooperation. So what we did basically was to recruit more than 1,000 practicing religious believers, Christians. We thought practicing Christians would be a good sample to test social heuristics hypothesis because they engage in regular interactions with other believers, so they may be more likely to internalize these social heuristics. We also recruited 2,800 atheists to avoid deception, but we do not focus on them here. So what we did was to use a one-shot prisoner's dilemma game with 50-cent endowments. Transfers are doubled so that this in fact constitutes a social dilemma. There are two experimental manipulations here. One is to compare intuitive and reflected decisions. People had to decide in the prisoner's dilemma either under 10-second time pressure, which was intended to elicit intuitive reactions, compared to time-delayed responses, which were intended to elicit reflected or deliberated decisions, at least comparatively or relatively so. And the second manipulation was partner identity. People played in the prisoner's dilemma either with co-religionist Christians or atheists, or there was no ID revelation. Okay, and the setup looked something like this. There were multiple identity categories, most of which were kept constant, and this was counterbalanced, the order of these, and it was the religious dimension that actually was changed to either a practicing Christian or an atheist. So that was basically the setup. The results, it may be somewhat difficult to see because in fact the effect sizes were not too big, but it was statistically significant that in fact in contrast to the expectations of the social heuristics hypothesis, what we found was that in fact with reflection or time delay, people tended tended to become more cooperative, regardless of who their group members were. So there was, in fact, a generalized, deliberated cooperation, and which sort of contradicts the prevailing hypothesis in the literature about this. And when we look at different subgroups, this finding persists. For example, when we look at the complete sample, as opposed to looking at only the inexperienced people or only those who have comprehended, who have shown comprehension of the prisoner's dilemma game, or those who are categorized according to their religious belief based on their current, because we also elicited a survey at the end in terms of their current beliefs. And all of these additional exploratory findings were consistent with our main finding, which is basically giving slightly surprising answers to the prevailing views or questions in the literature. So to the question, are believers intuitively biased against atheists, we found no intuitive basis for discrimination cooperation, and instead believers and atheists were equally biased against each other, and this persisted even with deliberation. Further analysis, exploratory analysis, suggests that this was due to pessimistic expectations about their pairs' cooperativeness. So that's one set of findings that we find quite interesting. And the second question that we provide answers to is the question, are believers intuitively cooperative in general? Our answer to this was that no, they are in fact intuitively selfish, and they tend to cooperate more, in general, as they deliberate. And exploratory analysis further indicated that this was related to an experience, a self-reported experience about the ability to control selfish impulses. So, main conclusion, or actually the only conclusion in this, at least in this presentation, is to think and explain your reasoning. Because in our recent study, one easy way to actually promote reflection or deliberation was to very simply ask people to justify your reasoning. And that, I think, that could be used as like a self-justification, so explain your reasoning to yourself or to those around you, which I think clarifies the decision-making process in ways that perhaps identifies internal consistencies. This was a recent project published in Judgment and Decision Making last year, and this is the type of sort of cognitive process manipulations that we would want to develop further in terms of hopefully down the line providing some perhaps policy applications in terms of behavioral insights. Thank you very much.